Coming up on F'ing Up the Ineffable.
Can I tell you a funny aside?
Yeah.
I've got twins, okay? And I remember taking both of them to the doctor when they were, I think, 2 years old, and they had to get shots. And we had them both in the exam room at the same time. And one, I think there were 3 shots they had to get, and they did them in their thighs, And one of them had to be first, obviously, right? So the first one got their shots and cried like crazy. The other one's sitting on their mom's lap, and he just very, very solemnly says, "I don't want that." It was like, tough. You try to be a good parent, but yeah, you're like twins and they're watching that happen, I'm not sure if I would have rather been first or second in that particular circumstance,
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian.
And I'm Mike.
We're experts in some things, such as IT, which we'll probably never discuss.
We're published authors with over 20 books.
Wait, we are? Which ones did I write?
We're musicians who played on albums and TV.
And developers who have written software used by literally millions of people.
Wait, really? I have?
Over the years, we have had in-depth conversations about everything from theoretical physics
To the nature of consciousness.
to why Marvel is way better than DC.
Is it, though?
And we thought maybe you'd like to listen in. Trust us, we're really interesting people. And smart.
And don't forget good looking.
And we're effing up the ineffable.
Hello, everyone. We are back.
Yes, we are.
Unfortunately for everyone listening. So this week we are going to do Perception, which is the first in a probably 4, but maybe as much as 6-part series that we're going to do.
A loose series.
Yeah, loose series. That is going to culminate in a discussion of determinism or free will. But that discussion requires a lot of prerequisites, a lot of topics that we have to cover before we get there, because I've done this with people before, and I know that I have a very controversial opinion that is hard to understand without walking through all the different steps that I went through in reaching that conclusion. So,
well, and I would argue too, because you and I have had a lot of these conversations, that even if you don't end up in the exact same place that you do after all of this, there's a lot to be learned along the way. There's a lot that we can understand about, like today's topic, perception. There's a lot of things that we take for granted, that we assume that they are the way they are because they are, right? Like we don't think about them very hard. And then once you dig into it and you examine what your brain's doing, then you understand that there's a lot of interpretation involved. And I think that's kind of where we're going today. And maybe on the bigger picture of what you're talking about, that's kind of the goal, is to understand that there's interpretation there, that there's not, there are a lot of things that we take for granted that maybe we shouldn't.
right. Yeah. I would say the core thing to keep in mind about this whole series is that I think a lot of what actually goes on in our heads is very strange, and it's not obvious that it's strange until you dig into it, because you're just not aware of it. You're not consciously aware of the things going on. You just kind of go about your day and never really dig into it very deeply. But the moment you start stopping yourself and analyzing what's going on, or doing some really targeted experimentation with it, you start to see some of the weirdness, and it gets pretty interesting pretty fast.
I think it's really common for anybody to just assume that anything that we get through our senses, they are as we experience them, right? So if we see something,
our senses are an accurate representation of reality.
Exactly. That if we see something, it is exactly as we see it, or that if we hear something, it is, the thing that we imagine made the sound is exactly as we imagine it, or anything along those lines.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about that show that that's not the case.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weirdness, like you said a minute ago, that it's not typical. Most of what we experience in our life is exactly as we think it is, or at least it behaves as if we would expect it to behave. But when you start running into things that don't behave exactly as you expect them to behave, you start getting around the edges of, I think, what you're describing, which is, I think what's interesting is that we think it's a one-step process. We see it and it is. Right. Or we hear it and it is. But what happens is there is a signal. We get this signal in through some input, usually it's one of our senses. And then our brain has to interpret that signal and turn it into something that we think.
Yep.
And it's like that. It's that two-step process where there's sometimes some failures in there in the interpretation of what happens.
Sure. I wouldn't even call them failures. It's just there's I think and I guess we'll get into this. I don't want to go too far down. This is a little too advanced, but there's it's not even failures. It's more like you have learned to interpret it in a certain way, and that's the way you do. That's the way you do interpret it. If you're just not thinking, but if you're conscious of the fact that you're interpreting, you can choose to interpret in a different way, and that lends a new experience to the process. So, just let me start by kind of giving a brief example of one of the weirdnesses, one of the weird things, and this is the sense of touch. Okay, so with your sense of touch, there's something that's been empirically proven, and you can prove it for yourself. You can do the experiment and prove it for yourself. That is kind of mind blowing when you don't know it, but it's this. You have no ability to sense wetness. You cannot feel wetness. Your skin cannot feel wetness. It has no ability to sense that. It determines something is wet. You interpret something as being wet when it is both cooler than ambient and slick.
Yep.
It's the combination of those two things.
Yep.
And we know this because you can put someone in a body temperature pool and submerge them completely, except of course for something in their mouth so they can breathe.
You don't want to drown them.
Yeah. And if it's completely dark, after a short period of time, they feel no sensation whatsoever. They do not feel wet.
That's kind of a sensory deprivation.
That's exactly what it is.
Right?
That's exactly what it is. So that already shows you that one of the things that we take for granted as, oh, I know what wet is. No, you don't. You are creating that out of two separate signals, neither of which means wet.
Well, so another example that's really similar to what you're talking about, there's a science museum in Charlotte, Discovery Place.
Yeah.
I've been there a few times. It's been a while. Took my kids there, not, I guess, 10 years ago or whatever now. But one of the experiments that's there is that there are these copper tubes that, of course, copper will conduct heat or whatever the temperature of the fluid that's flowing through it pretty easily. So if it's cold water that's running through it, then the copper tube will feel cold. If it's hot water flowing through it, it'll feel hot. And you can touch them, and they have it set so that you've got cool water, certainly above freezing, obviously, cool water running through one tube, and they've got warm water. And when I say warm, it's less than body temperature, but probably 85 degrees or so running through there. And you can feel it and you say, okay, this feels warm, and you can touch them individually and you can feel that it's cool and it's warm. But then they have this place where the two tubes twist around one another so that you can grab both of them at the same time within one palm. And when you do that and you're feeling both that cool and that warm sensation at the same time, your body registers it as being burning hot. So when you grab it, you immediately let go. You say, wow, that's hot. It's going to burn me. but it's not. Like, it's literally the same tubes that you grabbed individually.
If
but
you
they
force
just run
yourself to
over
hold it, do you eventually figure?
You do, yeah,
Okay,
yes. But your initial reaction is that
That's
this
nice.
is too hot to hold.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know the explanation behind it, but it's obviously your body is trying to interpret these mixed signals in some way.
Yep.
And what it ends up doing is saying, this is dangerous, let go of it.
Right. Yeah, and I don't like, this is kind of like, there's all kind of little things about perception that are interesting like that. Like one of the things, one of the thought experiments I went through, and I actually looked this up, but I don't remember the actual explanation of it. But one of the thought experiments I had was how does your brain know that when you touch something, you touched it with your hand and not your toe, right? How does it know that? And if you think about this as like a information, computer science kind of problem, right? An information transfer kind of problem. Like if I was looking at this in that mechanism, I would say, well, there's really 3 ways I can think of to do this.
You put the source in the header or something
right.
like that.
You say where it's coming from
Right.
explicitly, right? Or every neuron it passes throughout the chain plops some chunk of data in there telling the path.
Right, so you get breadcrumbs.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you have a map internally of how long each pathway is, and you know what the propagation delay is for that path, so you can pretty easily tell. There's going to be some that are going to be. The problem with that one is that's the only information you have.
Right, is that left foot or right foot? Yeah, right.
And everything has to be everything has to be a different length, and probably in the body that's the case. Probably everything is a different length, but. I do remember reading how this is done, and it is something kind of similar to the propagation delay thing, but with some additional pieces. But it's when you just think about something that straightforward, as you have a nerve signaling from somewhere. How does your brain know which fucking nerve it's coming from, right? That is mind-bogglingly complex for something as crazy, as large as the human body is, with all the neurons we have in the human body, right?
Yeah.
And it's just amazing that we do it at all. You know what I'm saying?
And, when you say that, though, I mean, it seems simple to think that, okay, what direction is it coming from? Like that seems like a simple thing, right? Like you look at, okay, let's just say that you've got, and I'm greatly oversimplifying this, but let's just say that you've got a path of neurons that comes from each finger and each toe. So there's 20 paths that come in. Obviously there's more than that, just greatly simplifying that, right? But let's just say you do that, then, you would want to think, okay, well, if it came from my left thumb, then it's obviously my left thumb. Like that's pretty easy, right? Except I guess that data doesn't exist, right? I mean,
if you were to, you got to think about it like, just take the human brain and the spinal column, and you've got all the nerves branching out from that, right? Just put them in a big spaghetti pile, right? How do you know which nerve anything is coming from? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. There's got to be a mechanism because it works, right? So like I said, I started thinking about that, and I went down the path of trying to figure out how I would do it, and then I looked it up, and I saw it was something even weirder than that. It was kind of like the propagation thing, but with some other weird shit, Now,
I have noticed, and you and I both do this, we are both IT geeks. And because of that, we will look at things like the human body and try to apply IT computer logic to them. Right. And sometimes that just isn't applicable. And I think this is one of those times where we want to look at how we would do it programmatically. Right. and our bodies are not built like that. Right. We're not built with, you don't have like a header with all the detailed information in the packet and then a bunch of, data in the body.
Yeah,
of the
but
packet,
it's not that structure, but there is something like that because your neurons do. Like I said before, all the neurons think. So your neurons do as the signal is traveling up the chain, they do, modify it somewhat, but it's not directly correlatable to anything that we would know. You know what I'm saying? And so really everything in the brain is like that. Like it's just weird.
And not even the brain. So, we know that we have certain reflexes that through study and various trials, we know that sometimes the brain's not even involved. if you touch something hot by accident, you accidentally put your finger on a hot stove or something like that. You don't have to touch it and then think about with your brain, right, oh, I shouldn't be touching this. Let me move my hand away. It's involuntary reflex that happens, and it doesn't even involve your brain when that happens. That happens as part of your neural system, but it doesn't actually go all the way to your brain and back.
I've heard that, and I don't know that I believe it. I'm going to tell you why. There's the story. I know I've mentioned this before, but I don't know if I've mentioned it in the podcast, but I know I've told you about it. And this has happened with more than one monk, but the one I know the story of for sure was I can't remember his name. Tuck Quick Hang or something. I'm butchering his name. Okay. I don't remember his name. He was a Buddhist monk in Vietnam during the war. And he was on the cover of Rage Against the Machine, burning.
Okay. Yeah.
The photographer who took that photo, he watched the whole thing, and he said basically the guy walked off the vehicle. He sat down in a lotus position. They poured the gasoline over his head, and then he lit the match. Right. And he said he watched him the entire time, and the man never made a sound. He said the only sound he made was when his skull cracked from the heat.
But is there a difference between it being expected and not expected? Like that, and I'm just asking. Like, if you know,
well, I mean, I'm just going to your point. I'm just going to your point, though. You said it doesn't reach the brainstem, so it doesn't reach the brain. If it doesn't reach the brain, you can't prevent it, right? Even expecting it doesn't change anything. You know what I'm saying? It's
I don't know if that's true, but I'm not trying to argue that point. What I'm saying is, think about, like, let's say you're walking down a hallway and your significant other decides they're going to jump out and try to surprise you, jump scare, right? Sure. If you know they're there, you brace yourself in a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. And when they jump out, you might or might not actually still be startled and jump, but you might not, like I said, you might not. But if you don't know they're there, you almost invariably are going to jump and probably, shout some obscenity or something, right? But the fact that you can prepare yourself for that thing that might happen changes the way that you react.
Well, that's because it's a surprise, though.
Well, right, and that's what I'm saying. And so the description I gave was just the idea of accidentally doing something you didn't mean to, like touching something hot.
I'm gonna tell you straightforward. I can't put my hand on a hot stove and keep it there willingly right now, knowing it's gonna hurt. I can't do that.
Yeah.
This man burned to death.
Well, yes, and
all I'm saying is that this is actually what got me started on meditation. This is the whole thing, okay? Yep. Because that's a superpower. Like if you can literally not feel pain to the point that you can die without feeling pain or without reacting to pain.
I was gonna say you can endure pain.
Well, so okay, hang on. So here's the difference. I do want to be very clear about this. I do not believe he was enduring anything.
Okay.
Okay. Because I have had enough experience with this to know that you can change your relationship to pain.
Yes.
And you cannot really resist all that well. Like you can, resisting it is actually is going against what you need to do. Like it's the opposite of what you need to do. In order to change your relationship to pain, you have to go into it, not away from it.
I agree.
So I think what he was doing, and again, I'm not anywhere near that level, but just in my own experiments, what I do with pain is I concentrate very hard on what I'm actually feeling, what the actual sensations are. I'm not thinking about what damage it's potentially doing. In fact, I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking this can't possibly, this isn't damaging me at all. This isn't hurting me at all.
Right.
This is simply a sensation. I'm experiencing an experience, and I want to get everything I can out of that experience. I want to experience it completely, right? That to me changes it. I still feel it, but it's no longer suffering.
Well, I agree. And it's, I mean, kind of layman's terms, you get used to it, right? I mean, that's what a lot of people say is that if you do something that hurts you, but it's something you got to do, and you do it over and over again. An example that I've heard is that you take somebody who's diabetic and they have to take insulin shots, okay? You can have somebody who cannot stand needles, and they cannot imagine themselves being in a situation where they have to give themselves a shot once or even multiple times a day because of that. But then they do it a few times, and it's difficult the first time or two that they do it, but they quote unquote get used to it. They have learned what the experience is like, and they have learned to accept it for what it is. It doesn't mean they like it.
I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what's happening. I understand that's what people think's happening, but I don't think it's what's happening. I think what's happening is like I've said to you personally, but I don't think I've said on this podcast. There's really just two emotions. There's fear and there's love. Okay, you're either moving towards something or you're moving away from it. That's it. So when you're dealing with pain, that's fear. It's all fear.
Fear of death.
It's it's just fear of something. You don't know a lot of times. Sometimes it's fear of pain itself, right? But what happens is, after you've experienced it, right, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to go, that wasn't so bad, and next time it'll be better. Or you can do the other thing. That was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I never want to do that again. And then you're going to be even worse the next time you go in.
I would say the second one rarely happens, though.
It does, but you see it with kids all the time before they've learned, right? Before they've learned any of these tools.
Okay, fair.
Okay.
They don't have the breadth of experience, so sometimes something like skinning your knee can be the worst thing.
Or going to the doctor and getting a shot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I've had 3 kids, and all 3 of them screamed bloody murder every single time we went to the.
Can I tell you a funny aside?
Yeah.
I've got twins. Okay, and I remember taking both of them to the doctor when they were, I think, 2 years old, and they had to get shots. And we had them both in the exam room at the same time. And one, I think there were 3 shots they had to get, and they did them in their thighs, and one of them had to be first, obviously, right? So the first one got their shots and cried like crazy. The other one's sitting on their mom's lap, and he just very, very solemnly says, I don't want that. It was like, tough. I mean, you try to be a good parent, but yeah, you're like twins and they're watching that happen, I'm not sure if I would have rather been first or second in that particular circumstance, you know, but
yeah, I mean, so that I just going back, I think that's part of where I'm coming at with this, though, is that the perception of what's going to happen in any kind of a medical procedure, right, is going to drastically influence what you feel when that procedure occurs.
Yeah. My stepdad, this was many years ago, like 20 years ago, somewhere like that, had bypass surgery on his heart. And he had went in. He didn't have a heart attack, but he had went in because he was having some other issues. And as they diagnosed those issues, they found he had I think it was 5 different blockages, and one of them they weren't going to be able to do anything with. So he had a quadruple bypass surgery. And the day before that, of course, they're doing all the dye and MRI and all that kind of stuff to get ready for the procedure. And I remember him telling me, I'm kind of scared about this. And to that point, he did not experience the surgery. Right. He's out, right? He did not. I mean, he had recovery, but for the most part, and I don't want to minimize it by any means. That's a serious surgery. Absolutely. And there are people that don't survive that. As a stepson, and my mom as his wife, and all that, we had legitimate worries about the whole situation, you know. But the fear, like from his perspective, he was like, you know, he wasn't afraid of the recovery. He wasn't afraid of the pain. He was afraid he might not make it.
Yeah.
You know, like he was afraid they were going to put him out, you know, put him under general anesthesia. And then what happens next? I might not wake up. You know, that's the fear there.
Sure.
So, you know, that clouds your perception of anything, right? I mean, you know, to your point earlier about either love or fear, right? I mean, that's fear, you know?
Yeah. I mean, being afraid, I think, has more influence on. I mean, I honestly think it's the base level of what pain is, like what suffering is, because, like, the difference is so stark. If you can, like, I used to be terrified of getting shots in the mouth at the dentist.
Novocaine.
Okay. Yeah. Because I just hated them.
Nobody's punching you in the mouth.
Right. And this was the first experiment I did with pain. Was that, because I was so it always hurt just so badly every time, you know. And it wasn't, I mean, the needle hurts, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is, of course, the Novocaine going in, the burning, right? Yeah. And then going back and forth, you know, sawing away at it.
I've never felt that, though. I mean, yes, the needle going in and you feel that, like, the pressure and the pain combined, like that.
There's a burning when
I don't think I've never noticed a burning of the Novocaine. But anyway, go on.
But, like, this was my first experiment. I just decided I'm not going to be afraid. There's nothing bad can go wrong here. Like, there's almost no chance that anything permanent can happen because of this. I know there's a chance you can go blind from it, but it's very rare, right?
See, I didn't know that. Now you've just added fear to my vocabulary.
I've added fear to So I was just like, nothing can happen here bad. I'm just going to concentrate on what it actually feels like.
Yeah.
That's what I'm concentrating on.
Okay.
And that's what I did. And it did not hurt. Like, I felt all the same stuff, but there's none of the panic. There's none of the racing, you know, you feel like your brain's just racing at 1,000 miles an hour trying to find a way out of this thing. Yep. You know what I'm saying? None of that. You're in it. Right. And all the fear goes away. I have not conquered that with everything in my life, right? There's still quite a few things that I get a lot of pain from, you know, a lot of suffering from, because I haven't conquered that. But that's a skill, right? That's a thing you can learn how to do. And just knowing that helps you, because if you've got any time at all to prepare, you can change your perception and not feel the pain, not be suffering. Right? Not being suffering through whatever the thing is.
So when you think about people that, like, will walk on hot coals or something like that, is that what you think they're doing?
No, that's different. The walking on hot coals is just, I forget what this is called, but you have a very thin layer of water that's coating your skin at all times. Okay. So if you just walk across them quickly, it basically the water flash boils into steam, and you don't.
So they're not actually feeling the pain and preparing.
No, I mean, I'm sure it's warm, but you know, it's my understanding is it's not actually, like, as long as you don't stand there, you're going to be fine.
Okay.
But there's a guy named Wim Hof who does something very similar to this. He does with cold. Okay. And this is actually a very good, if you want to experiment with pain, this is a really good way of doing it. You can take, like,
who doesn't want to experiment with pain? I mean, come on.
I know it sounds insane, but it really can have some positive effects if you can learn how to do this. But you take a bowl and just fill it with cold water and just dump ice cubes in it. Let it get really, really cold and jam your hand in it and just experience it. Just stand there with your hand in it. Like, you'd have to go days before it would cause you any kind of fucking problems, right? You're not going to get hypothermia standing there with your hand in it, and you're not going to cause frostbite. It's going to take way too long for that. Right. But you will get to feel pain. You will get to experience a non-damaging form of pain that you can then learn to deal with in a better way than being afraid of it. So Wim Hof, the reason I brought him up, he's a guy who teaches his method where you basically become impervious to cold. I mean, he's well known for, like, stripping naked and jumping into like freezing lakes after they cut a hole in the ice and just sitting there for half an hour.
But when you say impervious to cold,
I mean,
we're not talking about a superpower. You can't
but he
because people do jump into, and I'm not talking about like the what are they called, the Polar Bear Club or whatever, where they'll jump into the
he
cut a hole in the
there.
ice and jump in, and then they get out and they're like, wow, that was cold. But obviously, if they stayed in there, they would get hypothermia, and over a long period of time, you would die from that. But you're not suggesting that you have some mind over matter thing where that wouldn't happen.
I'm saying he uses this technique to take ever longer, really cold showers and really cold baths over a very long period of time. That builds up a resistance in his body. He has, like, the last time I saw, he had like world records in this shit. Right. So like he has developed a way, kind of like deep sea, like the divers who free dive for super, like do 22 minutes underwater, shit like that. They've just built up the capacity to hold air in their lungs for that period of time.
Right. But what you're describing, just to be clear, and I think there was a movie that talked about this a little bit, but you're not saying that you have the ability to avoid the damage that something can cause. But
this training does that, though.
Well, but it allows you to prevent the judgment of the pain itself.
No, it's both. So
okay,
you have to get rid of the judgment of the pain first, or you'll never get anywhere else.
Right.
Okay. So that's the first step. You have to be able to endure being in this cold, right? But then you endure it for a certain period of time, and what happens is your body changes. Okay. You can adapt to a certain degree. All right. Now, I don't know if this is because he developed more, there's a certain type of fat called gray fat. I don't know if it's because he developed more gray fat, because gray fat actually has the capability of generating heat when you're very, very cold.
Okay.
It's actually metabolically active and can burn calories to generate heat. So I don't know if he had more gray fat. I don't know if he developed some other kind of, his body has some other kind of adaptations to it. All I know is that he's got the world record for doing this, and he doesn't get hurt when he does it. Okay. And most people, you're right, will get hypothermia. Just like most people, if they try to hold their breath for 22 minutes, are going to die. Right.
Yeah. I remember seeing a video of I think he was a Navy SEAL or something like that had developed this way of holding in air and then letting out only a little bit at a time, and like recycling his own breathing and things like that, where he could stay underwater for some period of time. And it was like, there was this TV series, I think, where they were talking about people that were like the closest thing to actual, like, real life superheroes, or not superheroes, but people who had superpowers. Right. And that, I thought that was kind of interesting. So you're kind of putting it in that realm of, there are certain things that you can do in training to, and I say this with some skepticism, give yourself superpowers, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't call it a superpower. Like, the human body is very adaptable. All I think these people are doing are finding the limits of that adaptability.
Yeah.
Right. I was using that mostly as a demonstration of how you can take something that requires no specialized equipment, and you could experiment in your own home with pain in this way, and have demonstrable effects. Right. This man can demonstrably do something that most people can't do. Right.
So I think part of, or maybe the large part of what you're trying to put in here, though, like the takeaway point, if you will, is that we have some judgment of the things that we're perceiving, right? So when we talk about that signal that comes into your brain and then you interpret it in some way, then part of that interpretation in many cases is not just what is it, but what does it mean, right? And in a lot of cases, if it's something that, is a, for example, you burn your finger, like we were talking about earlier, then that's we got to pull our finger away because this is going to cause, damage. This is dangerous, right? And what you're saying is that this guy has come up with a way to develop a way to kind of conquer the judgment of those things, and maybe to some extent the actual damage that it might cause. But I don't think it's so much like when we're talking about perception, you're really wanting to separate the judgment of the thing from the thing itself,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Because I think, like you said, the perception we have of how we perceive things is that we are perceiving reality as it is, and that is almost definitely not the case. I mean, it's there are very specific things where you can prove that it's not the case, right? Optical illusions are a good example of this.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, just in general terms, it's almost definitely not the case. I'll give you a very brief example of just how weird the visual system is, and one of the weird things that goes on in it. You have two separate pathways for processing visual information. One of those pathways is pretty simplistic. It basically pulls like kind of spot information, and the other pathway engages your memory and pulls very specific information.
When you say pathways, are you talking about different neural pathways
Yes.
between your eyes and your brain?
Well, yes and yes. I mean, so it's between your eyes and certain parts of your brain.
Okay.
So you have two optical nerves that come in, but then once it hits, there's different ways it can go. Okay. And the neurons they hit store different kinds of information, and so this one pathway where it's going towards the memory side of things, that might be where you recognize a specific face. You might have a neuron, right, that only fires when you see one specific face.
Okay.
So that neuron only gets activated when that face or something, reasonably similar to that face pops up.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to put a face to it, for lack of a better term, let's just say it's your child, right?
Sure.
Let's just say you've got a child. So, you're somebody that you care about that is important to you, right?
Yep.
So,
but why this is so weird is we've all had the experience of being out and about somewhere and seeing someone and going, oh shit, and then you turn and look at them and you're like, and it's not them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or even the awkward thing where you wave to them and say, oh, hey.
And then you realize
they turn around and you're like, oh, that wasn't who I thought it was.
And we have this thought, we have this thought that, I misinterpreted that, or I thought it looked so much like him. I just thought it was him. That isn't it at all.
Yeah.
You actually saw his fucking face. That's what actually happened. Because when that neuron fires, it's not sending something that looks kind of like the face. It's sending the fucking face.
Well, and that's where you have to go back to the whole signal interpretation part of it. Like, we think that there's some like 1080p or 4K kind of
like
vision
a JPEG
that's coming
or
in. You're right. that we're sitting there and looking at it and doing image recognition in our brain to it, but it's not.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot more. In some ways more detailed, in other ways more vague, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
very messy.
It's messy, exactly. That's the word I was going to use.
Yeah, it's very, very messy and chaotic. But I think the key thing I really want to get across here is, for most of my life, I have kind of thought that when people have hallucinations, that it's like dreamlike or ephemeral or something, or how could you not tell that isn't real? Like it's some kind of cartoon or something, but it's not. When you hallucinate something, you see it as if it's fucking there.
Well, okay, so I have to use this. This is an anecdote from you and I. We were roommates a long time ago, okay? We lived in this little, I'm going to call it a shack. Okay.
Oh, you're talking about Culps?
Yes. It was one bedroom. You were sleeping on the couch in the living room. I felt guilty.
That thing was maybe 500 square foot. It was no bigger than that.
And I remember talking to you one morning because you swore that you heard some voice calling your name in the middle of the night. And you were like, it was not my imagination. It was not a dream. It was really happening.
Yep.
But to your point, like we can hallucinate a lot of stuff. And I know, and, we talked about this in another episode, we can do things that are happening in dreams, for example, that we swear are real. Like, you could put a person on a lie detector and yes, that was actually happening because you're experiencing them in your brain. But that's the weird thing about it is that the inputs, we talk about our senses, but, and again, I think we talked about this in another episode, but sometimes we have these internal inputs. Like we will have something that's generated in one part of the brain and becomes an input to another part of the brain. And we can't distinguish whether that came from an external source or an internal source.
Right.
So we just assume it's real.
Right. And I mean, it's when you think about this, like I got into an online argument with somebody about this, because it's like, she was saying something like, when are we going to be brave enough to choose, to say there's more than 5 senses, there's all these, and I was like,
there's more than 5 senses.
I was like,
yeah.
Listen, man, you could divide this into like 6,000 senses if you want to. It's arbitrary. We made the whole fucking thing up to start with. So
and when we do that with a lot of things, like 5 senses, or, there used to be the food pyramid, or the 4 food groups, I should say, or the rainbow, and we want to split that to certain colors. All those are cases where we want to categorize and pigeonhole stuff. But yeah, it's a gradient. It's always a gradient.
But the point I was getting at is like, because she was talking about, well, I consider a sense anything that enters through neural stimulation of your body. And I'm like, okay, well then describe what you see in a dream.
Right.
What is that? Because you see, or what you see when
but that's stimulating neurons, just not the ones that are as connected.
But it's not coming from outside,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So or smell. What about when you smell something in a dream, or do you just remember something? Or a good example. Sometimes I've had the experience of I would smell something and it brings back a vision, or it brings back a sound, a song or something,
Can I throw something out there that, like, it took me way too long to recognize this, but it just reminded me when you said that about smell. And it's just funny to me because literally smell. So you think about vision, and these are light waves are being reflected off of something, and you're getting that light wave in your eye. You think about sound, and it's literally
vibrations of the air.
Vibrations of the air that are hitting, but smell is literally you are getting the molecules of the thing, and they're interacting with your neurons in your nose. Okay?
Tastes the same way.
Yes, it is.
So if you've ever tasted a fart, just think about it.
Exactly. And that's what I was just thinking of. Like, if you've ever smelled somebody that farted, it's because you got that, methane gas or whatever in your nose. You've got the actual molecules in your nose. So, just think about that. There aren't any like smell waves. Like there are light or sound waves, right?
Yep.
So anyway, continue.
Yeah. But like the visual system is interesting, I think, really, because it is the place where we can see this departure from reality most easily, because vision is so incredibly complicated that there are so many little artifacts and corner cases where you can kind of pull the veil back a little bit. Like one of the things that I think we mentioned spoiler alert, we did this episode once before, and
due to technical difficulties, we lost the whole thing, and we're starting over. But it's gonna be much better this time, so you didn't miss out on anything.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, what we talked about that time was there's this illusion you can do, this optical illusion you can do. I guess it's really not an illusion; it's a revealing of an illusion. We have this. When you look at your visual field, it's continuous, right? There's no blank spots or anything. But there's this little test you can do where you can see that you have a blind spot right in the middle of each eye. Okay. And I forget what this test is called, but you can look up how to do it online. But it basically just involves you taking a point or an object or a thumb or something, and you holding it out in front of you and looking at it with both eyes, and then you closing one eye and move it until it disappears, and it will disappear.
Yeah. So basically the science behind it is that you have these rods and cones that are in your cornea on the back of your eye, but where the actual optic nerve attaches to the back of your cornea, there are no rods or cones. So you don't actually have the ability to experience the sight in that exact point in your vision where that optic nerve attaches to the back of your eye.
Yeah, and the weird reason why this is, because not every creature is like this, but humans are like this. Our optic nerve comes in, and I believe I've got the order of this right. It attaches actually to the, it basically explodes out into the back wall of the eye and then kind of fans all the rods and cones out to cover your retina, right? So you've got where the place where it basically exploded into the eye to do that. Yeah. Whereas some other creatures, it doesn't go to the back of the retina. It actually attaches behind the retina and then fills out that way. So some creatures do not have this, but we do. And you can see it, and you've never been aware of it your whole life. You have no idea that right in the center of your eye, you can't see shit. You don't know that because your brain is interpolating both of the images and filling it in. It's filling it in real time, and you don't even know it.
And even if you close one eye, you don't see it.
Right.
It's not until you do very specific movements where you focus your eye in a particular direction, and then you can move some object like your thumb or something like that into a very specific space in front of your eye where you realize that you can't actually see the tip of your thumb anymore.
Yeah, and it's so weird because it's not like there's a blank spot there. Like, the room's still there or whatever the fuck you're in. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like your thumb just disappears.
Right. And it's because your brain is interpreting all these signals that come in. And just like you said, in that interpretation, there's some amount of...
like fudging.
Yeah, it's like guessing. It's like interpolation. Yep. It's not like we're getting the actual data. Instead, we are fabricating the data based on what we expect.
Yep. And that's just part of it. Like, there's a whole nother illusion that you're not aware of that happens all the time where you cannot see what happens when your eyes are moving. And people don't even realize this, but like, all you got to do is just look in one place and look in another place and then look back. You'll realize you see what's happening there. You see what's happening when you come back. You never see what's happening in between the two. Right? Because it's too fucking confusing. Like, your brain can't figure this shit out. So you literally just lose that time. You don't even realize you missed the time. Right. Like it's like there. So this is, I swear to God, I think this is 90% of the reason you see people who they're like, I looked and I never saw them coming. What happened is they didn't, the thing they looked at was past the thing that was coming, right? On both sides, right? So they didn't see the thing in the middle. You know, they did look. It's just... this thing was coming from some angle where it wasn't visible.
Yeah, two of my favorite things around this. One is kind of simple, but it's like through experiment you can see it's pretty accurate. Is that you do not have color vision in your peripheral vision.
Right.
And I think that's really cool because you can take anything and if you look at it and you put it out to your peripheral vision, you'd say, oh, well, it's still red or blue or whatever. Right. But if you actually, like, if you don't have that knowledge ahead of time and you hold something out at your peripheral vision, you don't turn to look at it, you can't tell what color it is. You just don't know.
Right.
So, you know, that's one of those where, you know, our brain fills in what we expect. So like if we already know that that's the color, we can just tell you absolutely it's blue or whatever.
If I remember correctly, the reason this is because you, I forget whether it's rods or cones, but one of the two is responsible for color, and you don't have those for your peripheral vision.
And then the other, and I cannot, there's a name to this particular experiment that happened, but it's fascinating to me. And I did it and absolutely fell for it. Okay. So admittedly, but I want to say that I had heard that something like 55 or 60% of people that have been involved in this particular experiment, fell into the same category I did where they didn't notice the thing. So the idea is that you have a couple of people that are out on a basketball court that are playing basketball against one another. I can't remember. I want to say it's 2-on-2, but I might be wrong about that.
Oh no, this was if this is the experiment I'm thinking of, it was an entire team.
Yeah, it might be, but the question was, you need to keep track of how many times the ball is passed by each team, right? So you're paying attention to how often the ball gets passed. Yep. And when you do that, you get to the end and it asks you about the gorilla. Right. Okay. And you're like, what are you talking about? And I
think this is the something gorilla experiment. If I remember
exactly, yeah, and again, I don't remember the name of the person who conducted it, but it was fascinating because during that 2-minute video or whatever it is, there's literally a person in a gorilla costume that walks out onto the court and in between the players and then back off the court again
and like waves his arms and shit too.
Yes, it's very obvious if you're paying attention. Yeah. But because you're so focused on the basketball and they're passing the ball around and you're trying to count those things. You're very focused on that. You do not notice literally the gorilla in the room,
Right.
as part of that. I think that's fascinating because, we think that we're looking at something just like a video. This is a video. It's right in front of your eyes. You supposedly are seeing everything there, but because your focus is somewhere other than, we'll call it something extraneous, right? Then you think you're seeing everything. You would claim that you watched the whole thing, but you obviously missed really important parts of it.
And this is kind of a weird segue, but I think this is very important to highlight here because this goes more into the series. This tells you how important attention is, right? Because you can have two completely different experiences depending upon where you're placing your attention, right? And that's true for the pain thing, because that's all that really is choosing what you're focusing on. Yeah. You're either focusing on this fear of what you think might happen, or you're focusing on what's actually happening, right? And it's a completely different experience based on which one you do.
Well, to that point, and I know where you're going, but let me just, your context. And when I say context, it's really your brain state, right? So if you imagine you can be in the same place, but you have two very different lines of thought and being in the same place, what you see and what you perceive is going to be extremely different one person than the next. An example would be you go to a football game, okay? I'm a football fan, and I go out on the field. Or I'm sorry, not the field. I go out in the stands.
You're a football player.
I'm a football fan, not a player. That's right. I'm a football fan, and I go out in the stands, and I'm paying attention to the game. Or I'm an FBI agent, and we put snipers out in specific places on every single game. And I'm paying attention to the threats that are happening within that game. You might have the same view. You're seeing the same things going on, but what matters to you, what your context is and what you're doing completely changes what you're watching and how you experience those moments.
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure, like I said, it's not super important for this, but I wanted to make sure to bring it up because the attention piece is the theme of the whole thing, really. Yeah. Like the whole thing is about, like, life is about where you place your attention. So it's extremely important. But back on the weirdness of vision, one of the other things I wanted to kind of mention here was this story, because this really, really gets at the crux of how weird it is. This story that I got from is the pinnacle story from the book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Mm-hmm. Which is written by this neurologist and neurosurgeon who his focus really for almost his whole career was on extremely weird cases of brain damage.
Right.
And he had a customer or a patient who basically believed his wife was a hat. Like he tried to put her on. Like he knew it was his wife, mm-hmm. but he thought she was a hat. Now, I don't know what his actual, his visual experience was, right. But like he claimed she was a hat. That's when you asked him, that's what he would tell you, right? And this, of course, was caused because he had some serious brain damage,
right?
But it's I think very illustrative of how far out of whack things can get. This is not a case of, the man was completely rational in every other way. He just thought his wife was a hat because of a screw up in his visual cortex.
And brain damage, I think, is maybe a slightly separate topic, because I think that when you're talking about the experience of the average person, typically you're not going to have like severe brain damage.
Sure.
But to that point, I think it's important to note, again, when you think about, it's not just one thing. You're not just experiencing things as they are. There is a signal. And then, so the signal itself, you've got two parts to this. You've got the signal, and that let's just say, for example, I mean, in an extreme example, you're blind. You don't get the signal, right? But there are a lot of things that are in between fully sighted and blind. Sure. There are things that can affect the signal. Same thing with auditory or touch or smell or anything else. There are things that can affect the signal, but then there are the parts that can affect the interpretation of the signal. Sure. And that's your brain, sure. Right? So maybe your vision is perfect, but you have brain damage or you have any kind of abnormality in any of those types of things that can change the way that you interpret that signal. So, like, for example, there's agnosia, I think is what it's called, where you can see something absolutely fine, but for some reason your brain can't identify what that thing is. Like, for example, you might see a bicycle and you can say those are tires and those are pedals and those are handlebars,
but you can't put it
put it together and say that's a bike, right? Because for some reason your brain blocks those types of things. That happens too. Maybe that's not common. That's not something that everybody deals with, but it does highlight that idea that there is a difference between the signal that comes in and the way that we interpret it.
Sure. I mean, like, is it synesthesia or where people see sounds?
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, that's, yeah. So, you've got all these cases, but I mean, to some degree, we're actually not sure that our visual system ever correctly represents anything. I mean, like I said this very provocative thing last time we did this, and I say it mostly to be provocative, but it is kind of true. It's pretty likely that you've never actually seen anything the way it is in your entire fucking life.
I ran into something recently that I thought was really interesting, and I don't want to go back to a version of this podcast that'll never be released too much, but to that point, one of the things that we talked about then, and we will talk about now, is how our vision. We have a very specific, what we call the visual spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? We see these particular colors, and there are things that are outside either, at a higher wavelength, thank you, or shorter that our eyes don't pick up, but that exist. So I'm reading this book recently, Hail Mary. I think it's going to be Project Hail Mary. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a movie sometime soon. If I think I saw that recently. But one of the things that the main character in that book postulates is he's actually having contact with some alien life, and he's wondering about, he notices that in their ship, it seems dark to him. But that he's like, well, I wonder if their vision is outside of our, a human's visual spectrum, right? And it's really interesting to think about it that way, because there is our eyes are tuned to very specific wavelengths that we see as color, and that we start putting edges to things and understanding, distances and various things, but it's all related to those very specific wavelengths that we see. But we know that there is ultraviolet and there is infrared and everything that's beyond those, even down to like radio wavelengths, which is still in the X-rays
and gamma rays.
Exactly. That's all within that same spectrum. It's just a matter of the frequency, right?
Yep.
So, what are we not seeing? I think that's really, really valuable to recognize that our eyes only pick up things within a very, very narrow range of that whole spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really instructive if you've never done this experiment. It's actually really instructive to look up what birds look like to other birds, because they see in a completely different spectrum than we do. Yeah. And a lot of birds, like crows, for example, which we look at and we go, well, these are just drab birds. They're incredibly colorful to other birds. Like they have all these popping colors and spectrums that we can't even see. So it's a really interesting thing. But there's something
or just another example. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but everybody has heard about a dog whistle, right?
Yeah.
Where you blow some whistle that people can't hear, but that dogs start howling because they hear it. Well, it's because they hear higher pitches than humans can hear. We know that there are other animals out there that experience senses that humans don't experience.
Right.
Whether it's, like you said, the bird seeing a different visual spectrum or dogs hearing higher pitches. What else is out there?
Yep.
Are there things that we don't smell? We know that animals, particularly like, dogs, wolves, even cats, things like that, they have very strong, smell faculties, if you will, that they can differentiate between different smells much better than humans can. Or what about with touch? Is there something out there where there are things that we don't perceive through touch that other organisms can? Or even if it's not organisms that are on this earth, are there things that just we haven't evolved within the earth to deal with certain senses that maybe are possible? And I'd say possible in that, just like, could you see radio waves? Maybe if you developed some organs that allowed you to do that.
Yep.
But that's the thing. We're seeing a part of the picture. We're always seeing a part of the picture, not the entire thing.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you imagine a radio or an old TV that you had VHF and UHF, which, by the way, FM, AM, UHF, VHF, all on the electromagnetic spectrum, like the same spectrum that our eyes will interpret, right? But you've got a range. So like if you are on, like UHF on the old TVs when we had rabbit ears, then, you would start at something like, 20 something and you would go up to like, maybe 70 something. I don't remember what the numbers were, but, those corresponded to particular electromagnetic frequencies that it would pull the information from and modulate it in a way that it could be interpreted into visual and audio streams, right? And that's all our organs are doing, our input organs, our senses in our body, is that we have a range.
Yep.
And just like that TV can pick up those UHF or VHF waves, but it's not picking up the very specific, let's just say a red electromagnetic visual spectrum ray. Our eyes are picking up those particular electromagnetic spectrum frequencies and interpreting them as a particular color. But we have a range. So there are things that are occurring. There is information. It's very dense. I mean, it's a very dense information spectrum in which we are only pulling out this very small slice of it.
Sure. Like if we
think we're experiencing all of it.
Yeah, if we could see much higher, for example, we could see, or if we could just see radio waves at all, we could see Wi-Fi. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
We would be able to see that. And presumably, if we were built to see that, we could probably interpret it. So it's kind of interesting that we're built to see what we're built to see. Mm-hmm. It's indicative of what we evolved to do. But you've been talking really more about the kind of hardware layer of how this all works. And one of the things I really want to dig into a little more is the software side of this. So,
and is that the interpretive part of it, the brain, if you will?
Yeah. So I mean, it's of course still hardware or wetware if you want to use that term. But one of the things that's interesting about humans that you kind of touched on a little bit earlier is that we tend to view things in reality as objects. So, I'm looking over there at that chair right now, and it's a chair, right? Yeah. It's not just a geometric shape. You know what I'm saying? And it's not consistent with the rest of the environment. My mind instantly separates that from everything around it,
right?
As a separate object.
We want to categorize things.
It's more than that, though. We because we see it that way, we interpret it as a separate thing, as a completely separate thing. But that's not reality. That's not true. What's actually true is some of that chair's molecules, some of that chair's atoms are actually intermingled with the carpet and the air, right? It's not separate at all. It's connected to
Right.
everything.
There's these electron probability clouds that surround every atom that theoretically they could be going miles. We don't know that. But you're right. There is a probability that there is some amount of the electrons of particular atoms of that chair that are intermingling with, or overlapping the electron clouds of the carpet or the bookshelf or the wall or anything else.
Oh yeah. There's a probability of that, but there's 100% probability there are some quote unquote carpet atoms inside the chair, and there are some chair atoms inside the carpet, right?
Well, electron fields.
Yeah. So you can't. Even in a real way, there's no actual separate, these things aren't separate things. Like there's one reality and it consists of all the matter in the universe. And that's really, our brains separate things because that's useful to us, but that's not reality.
Right. But in chemistry, things tend to be separated based on what is reactive to one another or not. If there was some reactive property between the atoms of a chair and the atoms of the carpet that caused them to react to one another and create something new, they would probably fuse in some way and you would get some new thing.
The fusing, though, I think is actually what we make it, what we call it of an object, because we think it's a non-divisible, right?
Right.
But that's still kind of, it's useful, but it's still kind of arbitrary, and it doesn't actually reflect, reality in any kind of real way. Like this is why we have these weird like quirks that we can't logically, we have a difficulty logically going through because of the way our mind works. Like the was it the Theban ship or something?
Right. Theseus.
Yeah, the ship of Theseus is where, you take this ship and over time it's just a very useful ship and it keeps getting repaired to the point to where every single plank on the ship ends up getting replaced at some point with another brand new plank. And you're at the end of it, you don't have any of the nails, any of the fasteners, any of the planks, any of the rope, any of the sails. Nothing is the same. It's all completely new. Is it the same ship? Well, kind of, yeah, I would think.
Right. But then to take it further is if you kept all of those pieces that you replaced and then you assembled a new ship out of those, which one is actually the original ship?
Right. Or if you just take all those pieces and you put them in a warehouse somewhere or you scatter them across the globe, is it still the original ship? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So it's... I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion of that because it doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to illustrate here is that the way we visually interpret things actually causes us to think about things differently in ways that may not actually be, relevant to reality.
This is going to seem arbitrary, but I think it's relevant to this. Okay. I've mentioned this before. My favorite band in the world is Linkin Park. Okay. I know that sounds arbitrary when I say that, but one of the things that is unique, or maybe I shouldn't say unique, but uncommon to Linkin Park is that they're one of those bands that's kind of hard to quantify. Are they rock? Are they rap or hip hop or whatever? Because they have elements of a lot of different things. I had a friend once that told me that he didn't like Linkin Park because he couldn't figure out what they wanted to be, what category they went into. I think we as humans have this desire to be able to categorize things. And when there's things that we don't know how to categorize, we don't know what label to give them, then it makes us uncomfortable. And just like you were talking about the chair and like we want to say, because that's got a horizontal plane and a back, that you can lean against, it's easy to categorize it as a chair. But you can look at other things that are not chairs that still exhibit that same thing. Yep. And if you can put them in some other category, you might. But if there's something that's kind of in this weird space, is it art? Is it a chair? Is it, what is it? It makes us uncomfortable.
I actually think, and this just hit me now, but this might actually be the source of the uncanny valley effect. Because as I'm thinking about it, I think things bother us when we can't categorize them easily. Because it's like a danger signal. Like, we categorize things because we want to be able to predict things, like almost everything we do. We're trying to predict something.
Yeah.
So when you look at something and you say, that's a chair, you know it's not going to jump out and attack you. It's a fucking chair, right?
But you also know kind of like there are a lot of things that you associate with a chair. Like, for example, you walk into a room and you're tired. You want to sit down. You're going to look for things that look like chairs, right? And you would expect that there are certain qualities that a chair has, that that when you go in, like, you don't expect to sit on it and it fall apart on you, right? So you know, you start, to your point, you predict, or you're trying to predict what it's going to do, but also you're trying to understand what its usefulness is. You're trying to associate all the properties that you have in your head that align with a chair to whatever new thing that you just saw is, and see whether it matches up or not. And then you make a lot of assumptions based on that.
Yeah, so I think it's really just a predictive. But if you look at like the uncanny valley with like a android type robot, right? I think it weirds people out so much because it's not quite human and it's not quite not human. It's like in this weird fucking place where you're not really sure, should I trust this thing? Should I not trust this thing? I'm probably not going to trust this thing because it looks a lot like something I should trust, but it's not something, you know what I'm saying?
I've talked to real people that are like that too.
Oh,
you know, where they say something that's unexpected that you don't think like a typical person would say. And we do this with people. We want to categorize them. We want to make them, you know, Christian or atheist, Republican or Democrat, or, you know, whatever. You know, we want to pigeonhole people and try to figure out what it is their responses are going to be, or how they're going to behave based on those things. But people are too complex for that. And sometimes people will just do something that's unexpected. You don't know what to do. And it's not that different than that uncanny valley that you're talking about, where you know, somebody says something that you don't expect and you're just like, you know, like you don't know what to do with that. You know, so I've noticed that, and I know this is, I don't know, like autism's a real thing. And I've dealt with people who have been on the spectrum, and sometimes they will say things or do things that are outside of those social norms.
yeah.
And we have certain expectations of people to obey certain social norms. And when people that you deal with don't do that, it's not that different than what you would expect from an AI or some other bot or something like that, because they do something and you're like, you just don't know. Like, it suddenly falls outside of those expectations. You know, it's like you think of a real person and you expect them to follow certain rules, just like I talked about with the chair. And then when they don't do that, you're not sure how to react.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a real life. I'm not autistic, but I think I had a real life experience of this the other day. I had a guy from one of the guys I work with was from Portugal. And he was in visiting, and he was talking about something he did, and anyway, it was like a quintessentially American thing, right? And he was like, yeah, normally I don't like this. It was somewhere he ate. Normally I don't like this kind of thing, but you know, when in America, you know, you do the American things, and it just came off the cuff. I didn't even think about it. I just said, oh, so you shut up a school yet? You know, and the whole room goes completely fucking quiet, right?
Oh.
Right? And I'm like, yep, see ya. But yes, I think I had that same kind of effect, because it's just like everybody was like, whoa, how the fuck do I respond to that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's like, I think if you give a response that's far enough out of the norm, it does stop people in their tracks, and you know, and it kind of feels the same way. It kind of feels like that uncanny valley thing. But you know, I don't really want to belabor the point too much more here. I don't have a whole lot more I want to go over. I just want to kind of get the point across that the lens that you view reality through, not just with your physical senses, but with your thoughts and your expectations and your predictions of the future, that lens covers everything you see. So
not just everything you see, but the
everything
way
you
that
experience.
well, right, but the way that you retain the memory of that
Sure.
thing. So, like one of the things that I've seen this. It's almost become a trope in some TV shows and things like that. But it's true. Is that there is this extreme fallibility of memory, and it's been proved over and over again that you can think that you saw something, but you get influenced by a number of different things, and that even though you actually perceived something with your eyes or ears or whatever, your memory of that thing doesn't necessarily match the experience.
Well, yeah, because you're not memorizing facts. Like the way we memorize things is through story. Like we create stories out of things. We see things happen, and how that lodges in our brain is that, oh, this did that, and that did this, so that did that, and that's why that happened.
Right, and we convince ourselves to the point that there have been people that have passed lie detector tests and things like that because they truly believe that they saw or heard something specific,
and the way their brain
never actually happened.
But the way your brain worked, they might have actually seen it. Like that's the thing that's so like. You can, it's like seeing someone and recognizing them wrong. You can literally see the thing. Like you might have literally seen something that wasn't there.
Yeah, just like you were talking about before with hallucinations.
Right.
I can't remember which movie it was, but you had referenced it before where there was a character.
Oh, Beautiful Mind.
Yeah, Beautiful Mind.
Yep.
Where they were seeing hallucinations, and I remember you saying that you didn't think it would actually be that way, but that the more we looked into it and the way that kind of we have this circular input into our brain, sometimes it really could be you could, and it's not that different than what we were talking about with like dreams and sleepwalking and things like that, where we really believe that something is occurring, and it's not just because we're it's easy to take these dreams as ephemeral or something that is easy to debunk in the light of day, but it's all within our brains. It's all these input cycles where some part of our brain is outputting something that's an input to some other part of our brain, and we're believing it is true. And you can get involved with anybody who's in the middle of one of those cycles. They can't tell the difference. It is absolutely just as real as if they were seeing it with their eyes.
Yeah, I mean, anything. This is something I went my whole life without almost my whole life without realizing, is that anything that you can experience in reality, you can experience in unreality. Like your brain can generate whatever. Like if it's experienced it once, it can generate it again. It's a matter of the conditions being appropriate. But this is why. I mean, just look at it this way: whatever you're experiencing right now, you're not experiencing. You experienced it milliseconds ago. Okay, you have never experienced anything as it's happening in your entire life.
Right.
Everything is coming with a delay. So it's almost like if it was a computer, the thing's being written to disk and you're reading it off of the disk, right? You're not reading it as it's coming in. You're reading it once it hits your brain and it filters through all the shit in your brain to come up into your consciousness. That's when you experience it.
Right. When you're saying that, it's reminding me of how, like, when we see things at far distances and we recognize that there's a speed to light, and that we're not seeing things as they occur. We're seeing them as they occurred at whatever that speed of light is, multiplied by the distance they are away from us.
Right.
So just for example, the sun could go out and we wouldn't know for 8 minutes because that's the speed in which the light reaches us. But at a much more macro scale, but that's what you're talking about, is that information has a speed, right? Yep. It's not something that is instantaneous unless you're at the quantum level. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about, our neurons within our body, and that, they don't even move at the speed of light.
Right.
You know, like it's literally chemical impulses that are happening within our body. And it's still incredibly fast, but it is incredibly fast at a much slower rate than any of those things.
Yeah, it's a relative fast, right? It's incredibly fast for something that's really wet and is making a bunch of chemical changes. But I mean, comparatively, scientists just found out recently, like plants think, trees think. Okay, they don't have neurons. They don't think in any way we would know, but they do process information and they do react to stimulus and change based on that.
Well, it's like you can see plants that will lean toward the light, like and I always thought this was fascinating, but how you can look in the canopy of a forest and see how trees will position their leaves in order to collect the most light.
But it's more than that. They actually signal to each other. They communicate. They communicate with chemical signals. So they've done experiments where they can show that plants will react noticeably to stuff happening to other plants in other parts of the forest that they are not even aware of. So they're doing some.
And it's a little silly, but to that point. There's been studies about people that sing to their houseplants, right? And actually people that will talk to and sing to their houseplants, the houseplants tend to grow better. You know, they have more.
Or people who play music, like classical music tends to make them grow better and metal makes them grow worse. So, plants are not very metal. Who knew? Anyway, so I get, what I'm saying is, back to the whole perception thing is that, yes, there's a speed to it. But even beyond that, it's not just that there's a speed to it. It's that there's so much going on in your brain before it ever reaches your consciousness. In fact, a lot of things don't even reach your consciousness. You get some kind of a summary in your consciousness, which, in the form of like a feeling or something. A good example of this is like you were talking about you reacting before you're aware of it to certain things. Snakes are one of those things. Okay. A snake you will react to before you're even consciously aware of it. Okay. And I've seen this in action. I had one of my kids, we were in California and we were on one of the beaches, looking at seals and we're walking up this wooden plank that goes to the beach. It's called a wooden plank. It's like a long wooden walkway, pathway. But there was a snake on it, and I saw it like right before we got to it, and so I reached over and pulled Jesse, my son, away from it. He didn't see it at all. I pulled him away from it. I did not even realize I was going to do it. I was literally pulling him when I realized what I was pulling him for. You see what I'm saying?
So I think any parent will probably relate to this, but you're driving in a car and your child is in the passenger seat and you realize you have to slam on the brakes about something and you throw your right arm across the person, to your child on the right of you. And like, it is completely automatic. You don't think about it and say, I need to protect them. Like you do that almost as you're hitting the brakes or whatever, because it's so ingrained or,
it's almost like you got this little autonomous process running in the back of your mind that's like protect kid, and it's like, you see people who've like, grab baseballs or something like right before they hit their kid or something like that because it's just this automatic response, to this little program that's running all the time. I'm saying you've got probably thousands of those going on in your mind at any given moment that you're not even aware of. And you only become aware of usually when it does something, and it'll surface some percentage of what it was doing into your conscious mind. But it's like an iceberg. There's so much below that surface that's going on that you're not even aware of,
Yeah. And I think it's not just protection. I think there's a lot of that's going on in everything that we do.
Sure.
We have these values that will surface that we say these are the things that are important to us. But I think that most people have subconscious values as well. And you see that in a lot, you'll see somebody that'll react to something. We see this all the time with like celebrities where they get surprised by something or they're drunk or whatever, inhibitions are lowered, whatever. And they end up doing or saying something that they're like, that's not the real me. I didn't really mean to do that. But there is this difference between the curated version that we want to show to everybody, and even what we may have at the top of our brain, at our highest level of consciousness, and those things that are subconscious that are sitting down there that we have to, embrace or guard against, or whatever you want to say. I mean, there are. I feel like that's kind of where you're going, though. Like it's this idea that there is this lower level that we're not actively thinking about.
Yes. Yes. And that gets a little closer to like the whole free will discussion. But yeah, like just to kind of ease into that just a little bit, there are things that are always going on underneath your consciousness that you're not aware of. And those things are what surface thoughts into your brain. And the thoughts you become aware of and the feelings that they surface you become aware of. But our core perspective on this, I think that we're born with, is that that's mine and it's real and I should trust it.
Well, so to kind of dovetail that with perception. So if you imagine that, and I'm gonna make up a scenario here, but you're driving home from somewhere late at night, and it's foggy, and your car breaks down, and let's just say that you run out of gas or whatever, and now you're walking somewhere.
Sounds like the start of a really bad horror movie.
It does, and that's kind of what I'm going. There's a cemetery close by.
Oh gosh,
you
old
hear
house
wolves
right beside
howling
it.
in the distance.
There's a clown over by a sewer grate somewhere. Yeah.
But the idea of this situation leads you to look for things, right? If you are in this situation, you're trying to perceive what's going on around you. You're looking for danger.
Oh yeah.
You are
bats and wolves.
You're very
dudes
attuned.
in ski masks.
Yeah.
Hockey masks.
Hockey masks, right? Yeah. Dagger claws, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, chainsaws.
Yeah. You're very open to all the things that could go wrong, all the bad things that could happen to you, right?
Yep.
And you're probably going to be thinking, you're looking through this filter of your particular circumstance and experience. And maybe even your experience is all of those bad movies, right? But you're going to be in a different circumstance than if the same thing had occurred to you, but it happened in the middle of a big city in the middle of the day, and you're close to a gas station and you just need to go walk and get some gas, like how much of that is active? Like how much of that is you literally thinking about those things, but how much of it is that deep-seated bad feeling that you have in your gut that you go, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just feels eerie. Like I gave a couple of like dramatic, two different ends of the scale kind of examples. But we've all been in situations where something doesn't feel right, where maybe you can't put your finger on it and say, I'm seeing this, I'm hearing this, that there is this specific input that is telling me that I should feel wary. But we felt this dread or this fear or anything like that in a situation. And that's kind of a subconscious cue, right? I mean, it's something where you can't really point to any one particular impetus.
Yeah, so let me dig into that a little bit. So I think a little bit about that. So first of all, where I was at before, I'll kind of dovetail this with that. Normally, when a thought comes into your head, your default state, or at least my default state, usually was that I just trusted it. Right. Mm-hmm. So this is my thought. I trust it. It's real. Right. The first thing you really have to do is get rid of that. Because just because the thought enters your head doesn't mean it's real or true. It does mean it came from your subconscious, but your subconscious is wrong a lot of times. Right. So so you should not immediately, your first way you can change your perception is you don't immediately trust whatever comes into your head.
So if I can just, I want to translate that into something that I think we've talked about in another episode, is that if you think about the Thinking Fast and Slow book, you have this idea of system 1 and system 2. And system 1 being your reactionary kind of subconscious, kind of the non-active thinking part of it. It is your subconscious. It's how you react to things without putting any real thought into it. And system 2 being the I'm going to put some thought into it and determine actively what it is that I am going to, what action I'm going to take, what I'm going to think about it, whatever. So I think when you're talking about subconscious and when things are bubbling up from your subconscious to your conscious, you're talking about kind of going from that system 1 to system 2, and the idea of, sometimes the subconscious actions that, or the subconscious thoughts that occur, that bubble up to system 1, that they are, kind of in terms of what we saw with Thinking Fast and Slow, is that those tend to be programmed almost by circumstance. They're not always something that is rational.
Yeah. So, I would actually say that pretty much nothing that bubbles up is rational. But as far as system 1 and system 2, I think the distinction is a little fuzzy, because here's what I'd kind of say. I think the distinction Kahneman seems to make with system 1 is basically that system 1 is kind of gut reaction kind of stuff, right? So it's not that you're not necessarily consciously aware of it. It's just you don't deliberately make a choice.
Right.
And system 2 is where you do deliberately make a choice or plan or whatever. So the distinction to me isn't quite as simple as conscious versus unconscious, because even with quote unquote system 1 things, a thought or an urge still surfaces to consciousness. You just accept it immediately. Okay. So in my mind, it's still a system 2 action. It's still a conscious action. You're just not aware that you have a choice. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Your perspective is one where it is, oh, this surfaced, therefore it must be good, therefore I must do it, right? You only got one thing surfaced, and that's the thing you went with, right? Versus you had 5 things that surfaced, and you're like, well, which one of these is the better thing?
But in terms of perception, I think what you're saying is that you are assuming that the signal and the interpretation are all one and the same. That whatever signal you get, whether it come from external or internal, that your interpretation of it is the one and only interpretation of that signal.
Kind of. I think I'm actually saying more that you're just abdicating interpreting it. Right, you're not consciously doing any interpretation. You are accepting the interpretation your brain is giving you by default.
Okay,
which is a heuristic based interpretation, probably, because that's how your brain does everything.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, just in different words. Yeah. So, I guess I'm saying that don't. In most scenarios, I think the key thing you can do with perception is to realize that everything can be interpreted differently, including the thoughts that get surfaced that just surface in your brain. You can stop and you can not do the thing, and you could just look at it or examine it, and say, well, does this seem like a good idea? Why would I do this thing? How do I feel about it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But there is one case in which I would suggest you don't do this. Now, you were talking about walking through the woods at night with the graveyard and the house, and you're gonna feel very weird about that. And that's I think if you were mindful about it and you thought about how you're feeling, you could put those pieces together pretty easily. Okay, I understand why I'm feeling bad about this, why I'm feeling weird about this. This is a fucking weird situation, right? On the other hand, you walk into a convenience store and you're fucking looking for some shit, and you glance over at some other dude in there, and then you look at some shit, and all of a sudden you feel weird, right? And there's no logical reason for why you feel weird. You just look at the dude, and you look back at your thing, and now you feel like in a bad way. You feel like something bad's going to happen here, right? get the fuck out. Okay, there's one situation I think you should always follow your fucking instincts, and that's when there's no logical fucking reason for you to be feeling the way you do, but you feel it any fucking way. Do whatever the fuck that feeling is telling you to do.
Why do you think that?
Your brain has a way of warning you about shit that it detects, but it doesn't. It just knows it's a bad situation. There's no logical reason that's going to be surfaced for it. It's just. I'll give you an example. This is from a book I read 25 years ago, probably, about how to deal with bad situations. And they went through all of these and explained why.
Do you remember what the book was?
It was one of those gimmicky things like 100 things every cop knows or something like that. Okay. Anyway, one of the things it said is that if you're ever in a situation where someone's holding a gun on you and they take a step back, run or jump them or do something. They're about to shoot you. Okay. Because that's an unconscious reaction. When you're about to shoot someone, you subconsciously know there's going to be splatter. Okay. And so you take a step back to create distance so you don't get splattered. And whenever someone's holding a gun on you and they step back, do whatever you got to do to get out of that situation, because that's it. That's the end. Right. There's that's the kind of thing that your brain, like, and they would talk in this particular situation. They talked to one of the survivors of this kind of thing, and they said, "Yeah, I had this intense feeling. I need when he stepped back, but I didn't know why. And then bam, he shot me. Like you when you don't know why the fuck you feel very strongly about something, but you feel like you got a Danger Will Robinson sign flashing in your fucking head. Who cares if you look stupid? You might be getting out of a situation where you're about to die."
So. I don't want to argue that point. I think that there are subtle cues that maybe your brain can pick up on that you don't consciously think about that maybe that's the case. Although, like, how does your brain know without having read that book? How do you know that a step backwards is that subtle clue? Like, I'm not sure that. I don't even want to dive too far into that. I'm not arguing that point. But I think that there is some level of bias that can come from some of those things. I remember this as a kid, not a kid, but I remember being a teenager driving. And for whatever reason, I thought this, and I'm not trying to excuse this. I certainly don't think I was right. But I remember thinking when I would ride behind another car and I was driving, that I could predict at a particular stoplight whether they were going to turn or go straight. And I remember thinking that, I would think to myself, this car is going to turn left or turn right or go straight, and that I would predict it much more, I would be successful more often than random chance would have it be. This was not a scientific kind of experiment or anything. This was literally all in my head. And I remember thinking, man, I'm pretty good at this. Like, do I have some sort of ESP or something? How am I figuring out that these cars in front of me are going to turn or go straight? And I recognized as I started going through like logical fallacies and stuff like that, as I got a little older, there's a lot of biases that come into our perception. Sure. And one of those is just, like it's some level of kind of that survivorship kind of bias, but it's like, it's kind of the same, like, let's just say you buy a Nissan Pathfinder, and then suddenly you start seeing Nissan Pathfinders everywhere. Yeah, sure. And you go, oh, wow, I'd never noticed all these Pathfinders out there before, but, people must be buying them like crazy because, I've got one and now I'm seeing them all the time. You start becoming attuned to things, right? You start really paying attention, like we were talking about earlier, to certain things. And I realized that what was probably happening, I didn't believe that I was actually really good at predicting whether these cars were turning left or right or going straight, which theoretically would be assuming it was all equal, which it wasn't, certain pathways would be more common than others or whatever, but you'd have like a 33% chance of getting it right. And I believed that I was much better than that. But honestly, I was probably throwing out the negative results and not considering them very much, and then being really impressed when I did see the results where I got it right, and overinflating those and believing that I was doing it a lot more often than not. And that's a fault of my perception because
Sure.
I'm interpreting it differently, you know? So when I hear things like that, you know, absolutely, you hear people all the time that'll say, I kind of sensed that something was going to happen and I took this action. And it sounds like they were using some otherworldly sixth sense or something. And yes, I know there's more than five senses, but you know what I mean? That it almost seems like a special power or something, right? They used telepathy or something like that in order to understand what was going to happen and save themselves or save somebody else. And I can't, I have a hard time separating that.
So I don't
sometimes
think,
from
just to be
random
clear, I don't think
chance.
there's anything spiritual or magical or otherworldly about this. What I actually think is going on, and I've experienced this a number of times in my life. I've been in a number of very violent and dangerous situations in my life, from a very early age. And I'll give you one of those examples that probably the first one I felt this on, when I was about 8. But what I think is going on, we as a species, have been evolving for, billions of years, right? In that time, we would have developed intuitions about things, right? They're just programming in your brain that is already there. So when you see this thing, you can feel a certain way about it, right? And they're probably mostly going to be associated with our own kind because we kill each other much more than anything else kills us, and that's been true for a very long time. All I'm suggesting is that there's certain things I think that are fairly universal about humanity, that your brain has a circuit in it already that just says, if I see this shit, something bad is about to go down. This is a common signal of violence among my species. You know what I'm saying? Now the story, first time I can remember feeling this way, I was about 8 years old, maybe 7, something like that. My mom and dad were fighting. My mom brought me and my little brother, who was about 1 at this point. Yes, I'd have been 8. To visit for the weekend, and brought food. My mom brought hot dogs, I think. And she was trying to be nice. She was. I mean, it was really kind of heartbreaking. She was trying to be nice. She was trying to kind of, make up. And I got a bad feeling almost immediately, even when Dad was being nice, right? And it wasn't until later that I figured out why. Right after we got there, he was talking to her, and as soon as she came in, when he shut the sliding glass door, his thumb slipped the lock. And then as he was talking to her, he walked into the living room and walked over by the door in there and then came back, right? I noticed that, but didn't really put together what was going on. But when he started chasing around the kitchen table with a butcher knife, I kind of understood where we were at. So I went over and slipped the lock in the front door, and I went out. But I recognized immediately, like before he had done anything, there was going to be a fucking problem. Like I could feel it. And if I could feel it at 7, I know my mom could feel it. And she told me afterwards, she knew something was going to go, was going to be bad, but she thought she could calm him down with the food and everything, None of that happened. So I've been through a lot of those situations, and every single fucking time I knew something bad was going to go down.
So do you think that sometimes we outsmart ourselves?
Oh yeah, I think definitely we do not listen to that. We
Right.
go. There's no logical reason I should be feeling, and that's why I said specifically, if you can't think of why you feel this way, get the fuck out. Like you're feeling it for some fucking reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it might not be a valid reason. There's a possibility it's not a valid reason, but you got one life, man. You can't be fucking gambling it. Like, and this is not, and I want to be very clear about this. This is not a little bitty feeling. This is not a, oh, maybe it's like a jolt of panic hits you, right?
So I know that I've been in situations before where I hesitate to say, whether it's little bitty or big, because those are subjective terms. What's big to one person may not be big to somebody else, right? But I know that I've been in situations where I have had a bad feeling about it, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And in some of those situations, something actually went bad, and in other situations, it worked out just fine.
Sure.
So when you say that, it's.
No, I hear you, and it's not
hard to put a marker.
It could
on
be
it.
It could be a situation where the thing might happen, right, or it might blow over, right.
Yeah.
Somebody's exhibiting something that has got your spidey sense tingling.
Yeah.
Okay. That means there's potential. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but for me,
are you saying now that I have superpowers? I just want to be clear. Just go ahead and tell me if I do or not. Okay.
If I were going to give you a superpower, Mike, you would not want to know what it was. And it's definitely not
the power
appropriate
to
for this
blind
podcast.
people with my bald head. Yes, I got it. Yeah. But you also have that power.
I
so
do.
we're good.
I do. I had somebody tell me the other day that they thought I did it just for marketing purposes.
Marketing.
Yeah, for the podcast. So it could be two bald guys on the podcast. Nope.
Man, we should have incorporated that into our name somewhere. Just two bald
bald
guys.
dudes.
Yeah. Why didn't we do that?
But anyway, yeah. I mean, I my perspective on it though, just having been through it a bunch of times, is that if I start feeling that way, I'm looking for an exit. Like I'm not immediately running away, but I'm trying to figure out how to get out.
You're planning
because it's like I've got one life, right? If there's even a 4% chance that somebody shoots me because of whatever the fuck I'm feeling, right? It's too much. It's too much of a chance.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of those. Really, it's just a thought experiment, but it's like, okay, you've got a 10-sided die, for example. You roll a 2 through a 10 and you get $1 billion. You roll a 1 and you're dead immediately. Like, you have a 10% chance of dying and a 90% chance of never having to work again, and you can just do whatever you want. Do you take that risk to do it? And that's, just to your point, that's a really difficult decision to make, because obviously the odds are on your side, but there's a 10% chance that there's nothing else ever, so.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to be in a very bad place to actually take that bet. I don't think I'd take that bet under almost any circumstance. Like, it's just, the downside's just way worse than the upside. You know what I'm saying? There's like infinite is the amount of money you would have to give me to sacrifice myself. You know what I'm saying?
Let's be honest. Like, what is the difference between $1 billion and infinite dollars?
It depends on what happens in the economy in the next couple if someone wants to be honest with you. Anyway. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Now we're going to devolve into talking about billionaires and
we just did that.
Yeah,
so,
we just did that, so.
Depending on when these things get released, we may be just about to do that, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think this. Yeah, we're going to do this in a series, so probably this will be way after the billionaires episode. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to go back and really touch on what I think that are the important parts of this, is the idea that our senses, the things that we perceive, go through kind of a multi-step process, right? And that any of those things are susceptible to influence, whether it be through our own lens, our maybe I shouldn't say perception, but our own filter in which we see or experience these things, but also the fallibility of the senses themselves, the inputs themselves. So all of it is just kind of a it's a perspective, but it's not necessarily the whole, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the point. And
you got this patchwork view of things at best.
And that you can have multiple people that experience the same thing, but see it completely differently.
Yep.
They've perceived something different because their experiences have been different that led them to have a different lens, or that, it could even be slight changes in their ability, their actual physical ability with those senses. Somebody who, has, like we talked about brain damage, or has, difficulty with any of those senses where they can't see as well, they can't hear as well, they hear things, they experience things differently. And because the inputs are different, then the interpretation might be different. There's a lot of variables that go into that. And even though we think that we are seeing things, hearing things, experiencing things 100% as they are, that we have to understand that it's all interpretive.
Yep. And people have this idea, like, I hate this term, but people say things like, well, it's my truth. And I hate that term because I believe there's one truth, right? There's one factual way things are, right? Mm-hmm. But that term does make sense because everybody has their own way of interpreting things. And two people, as to your point, two people could witness the same crime and based on their different perspectives, come up with a completely different idea of what happened in that crime, even though they saw the same events happen to the same people in the same way. You know what I'm saying? It's the story that you create out of the event is what you lodge. That is the event for you. Yeah. I think it's important that we all recognize that whatever the hell that is, it's not the actual truth. The actual truth is something completely divorced from that, which may look a lot like it. It may actually be functionally identical to it, but it's not the same fucking thing.
Well, when you say the actual truth, I think even that is going to be subject to some interpretation, unless you're getting down to, say, the quantum state of every atom that's involved in a particular situation, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to go all the way to that. I think what I'm kind of saying is like the knowable truth.
Sure, but let's just say, for example, and I'm just throwing out, I'm being devil's advocate here, but just like you were talking about, you might know that person A killed person B with a gun, right? This person shot this person, and you saw it, and you know absolutely for a fact that happened. But you may not know the intent that was occurring between either one of them. You don't know why they did it. You don't know what happened before that occurrence. You don't know what happened after that occurrence.
Right.
You don't know all the other people or conditions that were involved with that occurrence. So even though you might know that there was a killing in which person A shot person B in the head, for example, you still don't know the quote unquote truth. You did see that was a fact that one thing happened, but that doesn't give you the entire picture.
Right.
That's all I want to say is that even in that case where it's very cut and dry that yes, you saw this thing, you remembered it perfectly, you still don't really know what may have happened.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm saying is there is a truth, which in that case I would say is what actually happened and why it happened and the complete state of knowledge of everybody involved, right?
Yeah.
You're never going to know that. Neither am I. Neither is anybody else. But it does exist.
Yeah. Let me just throw this out there because a lot of people have a hard time separating judgment from truth, right? We talk about justice.
Right.
Justice is one of those things where people will talk about somebody getting what they deserve based on whatever it occurred. I've been divorced twice, and I have talked to people frequently in both cases where somebody finds out that I've been divorced and they want to know why.
Right.
They want to know what happened.
Right.
And I don't even like to talk about it because invariably that person is judging in their mind whether they think you should have gotten divorced.
Yeah, they're looking for blame. Who's to blame?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. And when you talk about the truth of a thing, if we're talking about a murder, for example, or maybe I shouldn't say murder, we're talking about one person shooting another person with a gun, right? You might know that fact, But the next thing you want to know is why they did it, right? And then the why of it, you want to determine in your head whether
they were just or not.
Right. Yeah. Were they just or not? Was it something they should have done or not? And, a lot of times when we get into a courtroom, it's all about whether the thing that was done was just or not, and, a lot of times attorneys will argue whether something should or should not have been done rather than arguing against the actual statute and whether it should have been done or not, based on the statute. We all do that. We all will take the things that we see and we focus them through our lens of our perception and try to put some kind of judgment on it.
Right.
And we do that with everything. It's not just external things. It's everything that we input. And that's what I'm trying to say is that, when we talk about the input, we have a signal, whether it come in through, just like this. You've got a story that comes in and your immediate reaction is, well, why did they do it? I remember having a toddler and having a toddler in preschool getting bit. And this was like 1-year-olds, right? And they bite each other. This happens in preschool all the time. Any parent will know that. But immediately you want to understand the situation, right? You want to understand what were they doing? What was the other person doing? Did he deserve to be bit?
Right.
Like, you start getting into that whole deserve thing, right? Was he doing something that aggravated
you're
them
trying
or
to figure
not?
out, but you're trying to figure out how to correctly deal with the behavioral problem, right? So is there a behavioral problem with my child that caused this to occur first? There's a very good reason for that. I'm just saying in like reality, to your point, there is no justice. Like there is no arbiter of justice for the universe. Like justice is a completely human invented concept that we all have to decide what is just and what is unjust. That's a moral thing. That's not what I mean by truth. What I mean by truth is the actuality of how it was at the time. You know what I'm saying? Right. There was an actual state of all the molecules in the universe when this thing occurred. That's the truth. Okay. Whatever that state was, that is the truth. Now that may be unknowable. Okay. Right. We may have no capacity to ever get at the actual whole truth. Okay.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is, whatever your perception of it is, that isn't the fucking truth.
Right. And that's really the point I wanted to make, is that we have to go through this layer of interpreting it, and we interpret it against our lens, our values, and we determine some justice or some valuation of whether what occurred was appropriate or not.
Right.
And not everybody's going to come to the same conclusion. We're all going to believe that's truth. But to your point, and that's why I asked, that's why I said, are we talking about like the state of the molecules, right?
Yeah.
Because it's easy for somebody to say, well, yes, absolutely, that person did it. They shot that person and they should be held accountable for doing that. And then when you find out more information, then you might say, oh, well, maybe that person needed to be shot. I've even heard people say, well, some people just need killing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I agree with that, but I'm just saying that people have different perspectives on it. And regardless of, where you are, regardless of anything, you all have experiences where you're going to interpret things slightly differently, and not everybody's going to see it the same way. And when you said earlier, I'm living my truth, or I'm doing something to my truth, everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different interpretation of what that truth can be. So we all have to understand that there is no one universal truth, unless we're talking about the actual physical, like this is the state of matter. Like
I guess the best. I think what you're trying to get at is that there is a universal truth as far as the universe is what it is. So that there is an actuality that exists, but no one person knows what the fuck that is. Like no one person's perspective is accurate as to what that is. So this is why people will argue. People can see the same thing and they'll argue about what actually fucking happened, because neither one of them has the complete information of the truth, and they've built this story in their head about how it occurred, which is conflated with all the facts that they actually witnessed, right? And it changes the facts to some degree. It colors them to some degree. So they can argue about the exact same event that they both saw just as accurately as each other did, but they both made a different story out of that event.
Right. And this is the last thing I'll say before we wrap up the episode, but and I'm sure you'll probably have something to say to this, but I'm done talking after this. But we had talked about, I think, in our music stories podcast, I used to be in a Christian band, and part of what we would do as a Christian band is go to a lot of different churches, they were all Christian churches, and play music. All right. And I don't know how many different churches I've been to for that, but dozens, probably at least 50. Right. And something that became really obvious to me, because you would go to these churches and you would play as either part of a church service or some youth event or something like that. And there would always be preaching that would be involved with it and some other extra stuff, whatever it is, Sometimes it'd be a communion. Sometimes they'd have, some sort of like drama kind of presentation or, other things like that. I mean, there was a lot of different things that went on, but it became very obvious to me that so many of these churches that all would say that they were Christian. And just to be clear, I'm not anti-Christian. I'm not anti-church. I don't consider myself a Christian anymore, but that's just because of circumstances, right? I mean, it's just, I have too scientific of a mind to kind of buy into Christianity anymore, but I don't hold anything against people who are Christian. And I understand the power of belief, and that, I think that, having some ideals to live up to are important. So I don't deny any of those things. But that being said, we would go into these churches and you would see multiple churches that all claim to be Christian, but they would all have different ideas of how they interpreted that. You go into one place and that they would believe that, if you had somebody that you need to pray over, and you'd have them come sit out there and everybody come put a hand on them and all be like silently praying for them and things like that. You go to another place.
Yeah, Pentecostals, and they're doing cartwheels in the aisles.
Well, or I mean, a lot of different things. I mean, and I don't need to go in all of them, and I don't want to sound like I'm belittling any of them, because I feel like they all have beliefs that, I mean, they're all things that they honestly believe in, think that are helping. And I think that's in general, a good thing, in that you want people who believe in something. You want people who have some moral guideposts, if you will, right? I mean, it's better that whatever it is, it's better to have moral guideposts than to not, regardless of where they come from, I think. There are certainly a lot of situations where religion has gone wrong and has caused more harm than good. And I fully recognize that too. But that being said, the point was that all these places interpreted things differently. Like, they're all working from the same book, right? And yet every one of them have a different way in which they think is the right way to worship, or to pray, or to do good works out in the world, or whatever it is. And it just really kind of drove home to me that, just like we've been talking about here with perception, they all have a different perception of what it is that they're supposed to do. They all have a different perception. They all took it a different way. And it's all based on your own experiences, your own environment, your own lived reality, that you look at those things, things that you read or that are preached to you or whatever are going to hit you differently. You're going to take away different moral philosophies. You're going to place your priorities on different things because you're interpreting it through your own lens, and you take that away. And then, let's just say you go found your own church and you do something different, and you realize that you're doing things a little different than everybody else, but it kind of still fits into this kind of broad idea of Christianity, but they're all not doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And, I guess that's the point I wanted to make, is that you take something even as simple, quote unquote, as religion, as Christianity, and you think everybody believes in God and Jesus and that they're all doing the same thing, but they're not. No. They're all doing something different. They're all taking their own interpretation, their own perception of these things, and they're doing something completely different, but kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And that's the way I think a lot of this is. It's like there might be some, it doesn't have to be religion. It can be anything, but somebody comes up and they give, some, I think of like the self-help kind of books or the people that go out on the circuits and speak to people. And a lot of people come away from those things motivated, and they might have 75% of the same things that they took away from that. But everybody's going to be looking at their own faults, their own things that they're working on, and they're all going to work on something slightly different. And they all took something slightly different away from it. And you talk to those people like 5 years later, like two people that went to the same conference, but they're going to talk to one another, and they're like, yeah, I went to this Tony Robbins, whatever. And, I was inspired and I did this one thing, and somebody else is going to say, yeah, I took it a completely different way and I did something different. And you're going to realize that, it's our own lived experiences that's fueling so much of what we're interpreting from just life in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, to the Christianity point, I think, it's even more than just all the denominations. You have like 3 completely separate religions that basically all use the same source material. You got, Islam and Christianity and Judaism all basically, came out of the Old Testament. So, and I guess you could go as far back and to say that all 3 of those basically came out of Zoroastrianism, because it's very similar and much older. I don't, it's religion is one of those places where I think the lens of perception gets most dirty, because it's like everybody. I don't think I've ever met a religious person that does not view the religion through their own lens and cherry pick the pieces they like and the pieces they don't like.
Yeah.
So I think it's very telling. Religious people are usually, I kind of tend to judge their morality not on what parts of the Bible they think or what parts of their holy book they think are valid, but on what parts they think are not valid. That could be religion could be a whole nother podcast, and it's not going to be a pretty one. So I think we're going to close that down for that. So.
Thank you for listening to the F'ing Up the Ineffable podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. If you didn't, well, thanks for sticking around this long anyway. We are available on most major podcast platforms, including Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and more. We are currently releasing new episodes every 3 weeks on Thursdays, but hope to increase the frequency of releases in the near future. Please subscribe to us on your favorite platform to be informed when new episodes release. And also, we love feedback. Feel free to find and follow us on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, or Facebook, and let us know what you think. You can also email us at effinguptheineffable@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.